Our town is quite old. It is several centuries old. For many years it was a quiet, secluded place, surrounded by fields and woods. The only thing that disturbed the peace of this almost paradisiacal area was the railroad that ran about a few kilometers from the town. Beyond it was a cemetery a little further away. About 30 years ago, a terrible incident happened here that is still talked about. Betty and Stan had been friends since childhood, and when they grew up, they fell in love and decided to get married. But Stan did not live to see the wedding. Once, when he and his friends were celebrating someone's birthday, a drunken bunch of local hoodlums got into a fight, and Stan was stabbed to death. He was buried in the same cemetery behind the railroad. Dick Gibson, who was responsible for his death, coincidentally received a short sentence, only a few years in prison. Betty could not cope with such a loss and withdrew into herself. She spoke little and spent days at the grave of her dead fiancé. One evening the girl did not return home, and everyone went in search of her. Betty's corpse was found on a railroad track. The girl's body was cut in half. Her death was ruled a suicide, so she was buried outside the cemetery because of superstition. A few years later, Stan's killer, Dick Gibson, was released from prison. He decided to celebrate his return in his backyard. He gathered his friends and organized a party. Just outside the yard was a field of corn. When it was getting dark, Dick and two of his friends decided to go to the cemetery. It is worth noting that he not only felt no remorse for what he had done, he hated the late Stan. He said it was his fault that he was in prison. Alcohol finally made Dick lose his mind, and he went to the cemetery with the express purpose of desecrating the dead man's grave. When they found Stan's grave, the boys smashed the headstone, trampled on the flowers that Betty had lovingly cultivated in the last months of her life. Then they opened a bottle of whiskey they had brought with them. "Cheers, Stan," Dick said, and poured the contents of the bottle over the grave, and then smashed it against the fragments of the toppled headstone. Finally, the boys, drunk with alcohol, urinated on the grave. Having had their fun, the vandals headed back, but a locomotive blocked their way. When the train passed and the boys crossed the railroad, they saw a freshly trodden, unfamiliar path stretching far into the field. By then it was almost completely dark, and the sight seemed strange, so the boys went home as fast as they could. But before they had gone 100 meters, they heard a terrible scream somewhere nearby. The friends froze in shock, and then they saw corn stalks nearby rustling and bending, as if someone was walking among them, but there was no one to be seen. The rustling was getting closer, and when the invisible creature was only a few meters away, the boys took off running. It did not lag behind and pursued the fugitives with enviable speed. One of them turned around and screamed in terror as something short came running after them, crawling on its elbows, leaving a trail of blood behind it. Long hair stuck together with blood covered its face. The creature stopped for a moment and threw its hair back, and then the friends recognized it as Betty, or what was left of her. Muttering and elbowing at the loose earth, she caught up with them. Betty grabbed Dick and the one who had urinated on the grave by the ankles. They screamed, the corn rustled, and everything went quiet. The only boy who survived reached the city only in the morning. Pale, scratched by corn stalks, he fell and died on the doorstep of his house. The bodies of the others were found near the railroad. They were cut in half. They tried to explain the deaths of the boys by saying that they were drunk and died under the wheels of a train. This version was accepted with a stretch, but no one could explain where the bloody trail came from the railroad tracks to Stan's grave.